Hi everybody, and welcome to our Nikon European Film Festival chat with filmmaker Pieter ten Hoopen. You can ask your questions in advance, or some of you have asked questions in advance, and you can also ask questions by just looking at, if you see the screen here now, you should be able to see a little Q&A button, and that way you'll be able to just type in your questions and we will answer them as we go along. So welcome, Pieter.
Thank you. Lovely being here.
Oh, it's great to have you, Pieter. So just let's kick off straight away and just understand a little bit more about you and your work. You have 3 World Press Photo Awards, and you've been Emmy nominated for Hungry Horse. And it'd be great to understand how I understand that you started as a photographer. How did you evolve into filmmaking?
Oh, well, the thing is, yeah, I'm a very dedicated photographer from the first beginning. I studied photojournalism in Sweden, and I've been working in the field of photojournalism for the last 12 or 13 years at least. Filming was quite late because the fact that you first want to become a really good photographer, and you want to get in touch with your personal language and all these things. But after some time, I realized that some stories I was doing, I just felt like I needed more, basically, skills on a journalistic way of working as well. So filming was for me a solution in that. So when we produced the book Hungry Horse, which is originally a book, and the film comes with the book, I realized that I was missing the voices in the project. And by doing this film material, I could add the voices to the project. So that was the reason for me that I started filming. And also because the fact that production company MediaStorm in the US, Brian Storm, the founder of MediaStorm, he had been trying to convince me for about 5 years' time. And finally I realized that, yeah, this is the way to do it. So that's how I started filming.
Okay, so what was the biggest shock? What was the biggest thing that you had to adapt in order to move into a filmmaking voice instead of a photographic style?
Well, I think I'm still very much in that process right now. Actually, I'm still a very young and starting filmer in that way, both documentary and other stories we produce. I think, though, the storyline when it comes to filming is of course very different than the photography. We have the dialogues, we use a very different tempo, and you build it on a different way. But on the same time, I also want to try to keep as much as possible the personal language I'm having from my photography into this new film business, basically, because there are many good filmers out there, but I need to use the skills I already had as well when it comes to the language I'm using while I'm filming, etc., these films. But I think one of the most difficult parts for me was, I would say, and still is of course, sound. Sound is really difficult to have good sound in the films and to make it work great. So we're learning every day in the things we're doing.
Yeah, that must be a bit of a challenge, because if you're out in the field all the time and you're not producing a dramatic film, so there's no chance to go in and overdub. So how do you make sure that you get the best sound?
Well, I try to update as much as possible of the best ways to get the best sound. But at the same time, like you said already here, is that, I need to, when I'm working in a field, most of the time I work alone. The Hungry Horse film, we were only 2 persons who did it in the field. One person who specifically would do sound, but he was not educated in sound, but it was a big experiment for us as well. Yeah, and we learned everything basically in the field. And then the thing I do is that I try to, use the network I'm already having here in Stockholm, friends who work with sound or people who are good in sound. And we're basically educating each other as well in that matter. I think this, for most photographers and journalists, they have a great and big network around them. You can help each other out, and that has been very, very good and successful for our part to use each other's knowledge, basically.
Fantastic. Actually, I wanted to ask you about being based in Sweden, and just how much has being based in a different culture because you're, instead of your native Holland, how does the landscape, the light, the culture, how does that affect your work? Has it changed your work?
Well, yeah, I moved here for, I guess, about 16, 17 years ago. I'm originally educated in forestry. So that was also one of the reasons why I moved to Sweden to work in a forest, which I did. I mean, I've always had a very strong relationship to Scandinavia through my parents, and spending holidays here and having a family here as well. A sister who's been living here for more than 25 years. I think, I mean, I always enjoyed the all from the winters here, which are very dark. But for me, it gives me something extra in many ways. It's the mood here, the nature, and I'm definitely inspired by Sweden in that way. And as well, when it comes to the film in Montana, Hungry Horse, it's quite similar to the northern parts of Sweden as well. The landscapes and the atmospheres are quite similar. And I tend to, I think in my projects, tend to look for these feelings and these atmospheres very much as well, I would say.
So was the Montana landscape more spacious? Was there greater spaciousness to it?
More spacious than Sweden, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say so. And it's I think it's a little bit more, it's more wild, it's more deserted on that way. It's just all a little bit Sweden extra, oh, I would say.
Sweden XXL.
Exactly, yeah.
So tell us about Hungry Horse, because that's an amazing project for which you were nominated for an Emmy. So where did the idea come from? And when you got started, because many people may not know, it was a 10-year project. Did you know it would be a 10-year project?
No, definitely not. It just grew. It grew like it did. The original idea was, I once read a book from John Steinbeck called Travels with Charlie, and it's his first, this is one of his latest novels actually. After a long and successful career, he wanted to reinvent his world in the US. He wanted to make a trip through the US and to basically reinvent the country again for himself. He had lost the contact with the country. And then he decided to travel around with a camper and his little dog called Charlie. So the book was called Travels with Charlie. And while he travels around, he has a lot of anecdotes and a lot of good stories of all the different states in the US, but he doesn't mention that much Montana. The only thing he says about Montana is that he has a lot of respect and admiration for all the states in the US, but in Montana I love. And that's what he basically says about Montana. So in 2003, the presidential elections was coming up again, 2004, where they re-elected George W. Bush for the second term. And just before the elections, I realized I make a story about basically one of USA's most known and at the same time most unknown states there is, which is Montana. So I wanted to make a story of USA Today through one state. But while I was working the first week with this story, I mean, the state of Montana is half of the size of Sweden almost. So I realized I'm not able to tell this story. So the thing I did was that one evening I decided that, okay, the next day, the first town I'm driving through with my car is going to be the place where I'm going to rent a room for a week and stay for a week and tell this story about this town. And that town was Hungry Horse. So on that way I stayed put there, and I stayed there for more than 10 years. And well, I mean, the idea was in the beginning just a normal reportage, but yeah, eventually it turned out that I wanted to do a book, and I continued working there, and I couldn't find the story, so I had to continue even more and more. So I guess we started filming as well somewhere around 2011-12, so it's quite late too. So it just became this very long-term project.
Is it still a long-term project? Is it ongoing, or do you consider that it's done now?
Well, it is done in that way that, I mean, I financed the whole thing myself, both the book and most part of the film as well. And so I would not recommend it to keep put so many years, but yeah, I consider it's finished now. The book is finished and the film is finished. But of course, I mean, through these years, Hungry Horse has become basically a third home for me. So yeah, you never know. I love to work in these regions, and I mean, the topics we work with there, I think these are topics which I care about a lot. So, well, I say never, never. It could be someday that I continue again.
Yeah. So did you have a storyline in mind when you got to the town?
When it comes to the stills, when it comes to the photography, I did not have a specific storyline in mind. That came after, I would say, some years. I wanted the book to be based on basically a state of mind more than a specific journalistic point of view. I didn't want to tell about all the things concrete. So I decided after some years while I was working and collecting material that I wanted to become, the book had to become basically about my feelings, my meetings, and my world basically there through these meetings. And this I decided as well, and it came a little bit together with the fact that we decided to do a film, because when we decided to do the film, that meant that as well that the photographic material, the book, could be way more open, maybe more artistic and more emotional, which I wanted the photography. I wanted the photography to be emotional and to be a state of mind. So basically, by using these components, both film and stills, I was very free in the approach of both stories, I could say, because the story of the film is quite different than the story of the book, I would say. It's a quite different feeling, and that was the idea as well.
Yeah, the film it's very deep, very intimate subject. How did you get people to open up to you in that way with such some very traumatic stories?
Well, I think the main character, 3 persons, we originally shot the same stories about we did 8 persons in total. So and from these 8 we choose only 3 persons which we thought they were suiting well together. These persons I've known from basically the first moment I set foot in Hungry Horse. So on that way we had developed a relationship already. They knew who I was, they know what I was doing there. But of course, I mean, it became more difficult on one way when we started with film, because I mean, many people are so aware of the medium film, and when it comes to sound, and when it comes to people just seem to get more one way, maybe is the right word, anxious, or maybe a little bit more reserved as well, because film is the medium we use in basically everything nowadays, and so photography, people normally can say as well, yeah, whatever, it's photography, and we don't care that much. But when it comes to film, all of a sudden it became way more serious, and which was not an easy part. It was kind of easy to start filming them and working with them. But when we came to the publishing phase, the last phase, then people became a little bit anxious and became a little bit, maybe self-aware, or maybe they were worried what they had been saying and things like that. But overall, in the end, it turned out fine. It was not a problem, but it is a very different process.
Yes, I think people often, they don't realize that they relax and they'll be talking about things, and then afterwards it will come as a bit of a shock to them of how much they've opened up in front of the camera.
Yeah, definitely, and especially when the film all of a sudden as well became Emmy nominated, and which is of course a big thing in Europe, but it's an even bigger thing in the US.
Yes.
Yeah, and then that made people a little bit. I realized they were a little bit shocked about it. Well, I mean, they didn't know really how to handle that.
Yeah.
I mean, in the end, I would say even through the Emmy nomination, it weren't that many big changes for any one of us, so it was not a problem. But they still had to cope with it. They still had to find a way to deal with it, basically.
Yeah. So our theme for the Nikon European Film Festival this year is everyday moments. So, and when you're filming people, you're filming everyday moments every day.
Yeah.
What do you do to elevate them visually and emotionally to make something that is quite ordinary look very different?
Well, I think it starts all with a certain amount of trust and the way you care about the topic you're shooting. I think that you need to work, and it counts in general for me. The stories I'm doing in general are stories who are very close to me and to my interest. Stories where I care about, and stories and people where I care about, are topics in general where I care about. Well, that's the first start. That's the first key to start loving a project, because you got to love a project as well. And from there, you just basically try to tell that story you're seeing, feeling, and what is going on the ground. And this you can do in many different ways, of course. But I mean, the way I work is I'm always very focused on the talks, of course. When we film, I think the interviews with the people, they are key, of course, the things they're saying.
Yes.
And these good and intimate interviews, you can only have them if you have trust from these people. Then they will open up, and then they will feel confident, and they will feel happy about the situation. And from there, you can illustrate it with the visuals you find in the field with them or separately. And then, of course, the atmospheres, the light, and all these things sound makes it complete. And as well, when it comes to the photographic language, and as well when it comes to filming, you need to work hard with the aesthetics of everything, the toning, the aesthetics, which are really, really important, in my opinion.
Yes. So we're going to just take a question now. We've got one from James Baines, who's asking, as a filmmaker, how would you personally approach the film's theme this year? So it's everyday moments. You've got 140 seconds to tell the story.
Yeah.
How would you approach that?
I personally would approach them on a very, very intimate, personal way. Keep it extremely, extremely simple. Think less is more. It is basically a key for everything what we're doing in photography and in filmmaking, is that people tend to think it has to be like this or like that. It has to be enormous or spectacular, which of course it can be, and that's lovely, that's fine. But everyday small things around us, it can be anything. Those can be the most fantastic stories in general. Say meetings with friends, maybe you have interesting friends, meeting with interesting people in general in the area where you live. And that I always try to teach my students as well. See it close to you. Try to dig where you stand. Don't go here or there, but try to figure it out just where you are, because these beautiful, intimate little stories, they're often around you, basically.
Yes. So it's just concentrating on whatever's already there.
Exactly. Yeah.
Finding or getting your inspiration from what you already know.
Exactly. And give yourself the possibility as well to be able to return to the person or to the area where you're shooting. So you're filming there, doing the interviews or whatever you're doing, be able to go back and shoot it again, shoot it again, shoot it again. That's basically what you have to do. Gather as much as good material as possible. And then as well, which is extremely important, of course, and when it comes to both still photography, but I would say in film definitely, is the edit. Spend time with your edit. If you can't solve it yourself, take in a friend or maybe a colleague or someone you have a lot of trust for. Let them help you with the edit. You have to question yourself to build up the identity within the story. People have to question the story as well. But use people you have trust for to make it a better story.
That's terrific advice. Actually, just focusing on the edit. How do you edit? Do you start with the soundtrack? Do you get your pictures generally in place first? What's the start point for an edit? It's a bit like an empty page for a writer. Where do you start?
Well, for the moment, I produce a lot of short documentaries for different clients. And all these short documentaries, they are based on talks. They're based on interviews. So the edit of the visuals to this story are totally depending on what these the persons are telling in the interviews. Where's the story about? And what is the main character in these interviews? So the thing I do is that first I do the interview and I listen and I try to build up a visual world in my head, basically, what we should film after these interviews. And then we try to create this specific world visually around these interviews. So it starts with the substance. It starts with basically the main meal, and the main meal is the talk. That's the backbone of the whole story. And from there, you basically add the sauce to make, because that's what you basically do. The beautiful visuals and the concrete fish, these are the sauce who make the meal complete.
Yes, perfect. That's a very similar analogy to writing as well, where you have a kind of structure, a skeleton to which you add flesh. So it's the same kind of thing, that you're filling out the story from a core that's got a strong direction already.
Exactly, and there's also one of the things, of course, what's going on now, especially nowadays when there are so many smart tools where we can do a lot of most fantastic ways of filming with, and it's very advanced and this and that. That's fine, that's perfect, but it always starts with the story. You know, I rather see a film who is shot maybe on a mediocre way, but the story is super, instead of someone who puts all the energy in gyros or whatever, or other tools to make it look better or more flashy. If the story isn't good enough, I mean, the film won't be good either. But of course, the right combination of everything, that's the best.
Is the best. Mm-hmm. Yes, I mean, in the film festival, everybody's going to be using different cameras, different techniques, and we have different categories, so that we've got a category for technical excellence, and we've got the Grand Prix, we've got the student entry, we've got best narrative. So there's space for everyone. But I think you and Elliot Grove, one of our other jurors, of one voice in saying it's the story that counts.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter how good the technique is, if the story isn't there, you haven't got a film.
Exactly. And then I have to add that a story can be so many different things. A story doesn't have to be, like I said earlier, spectacular, this or that, or screaming, or a story can be, you know, a poetic little film about a feeling, a poetic little film about a thing that happens during daily life for someone, which we normally maybe never think about, but who this person maybe is able to illustrate in a beautiful way. It's all about imagination there, and timing and all these things, you know, but keep it simple and keep it easy, and make it grow in a different way.
Absolutely. I saw a film by John Wright, the fashion photographer, where he had he had illustrated a poem. So really, he'd put the pictures to a poem, and it was stunning. And that's something that any of our entrants could do.
Exactly. I mean, that's such a great way as well of training as well. Because I remember when I started with photography, I was working for the cultural department for one of the biggest newspapers in Sweden. They always gave me the cultural, how do you call the reportages, which was not connected. Okay, here's the text, read the text, try to illustrate this with an image. And that's a super training as well.
Absolutely. Because then you've got to get quick. You have to really understand your medium then.
Yeah.
You have to understand the power of the images. You have to understand how the images match up with the soundtrack that you're putting, or you've really got to be able to balance everything. Yeah, fantastic. So actually, that's a really good tip to say to people, to pick something, to pick a text, and think of a way to make a short film out of it.
Exactly, and basically the Hungry Horse film, which I did, and the whole book is based on John Steinbeck's novel Travels with Charlie. It's based on his idea of where is the country heading to, what is going on right now, and it's basically I take that feeling from that book into the project as a start.
Great. Actually, we've had another question in here. What is the advantage of shooting your movies with DSLR cameras?
Well, I mean, it's the way you can use depth, of course, is extremely important for me. And I feel very confident with the Nikon cameras and the lenses. And I've been working with them most part of my photographic life. So it feels everything feels kind of logic, and everything feels kind of easy as well. And we're basically using the technique now in a broader way, which we already had. And I'm personally not the guy who is the technique nerd or the technique guy, but but I'm looking always for the feeling. And for me personally, the lenses and the way we shoot and these tools from Nikon, which I'm using, gave me just a perfect feeling, and which I'm used to as well in my photographic language. So in that way, yeah, it makes it more complete. but definitely the way you can use it in the depth, which is more difficult with other cameras.
Yeah. So what advice would you give? There's another question now from Anna Schwerin. What advice would you give to a hobbyist photographer who wants to move into filmmaking?
Get your flying hours. Basically all about that. It's all about entering small and big competitions like this, but most of us start producing small films, make small stories. Just go out there, make it simple, and shoot these stories and work on the edits. I would say that is the best way to learn filming. That's the way I've learned filming myself, and I'm still learning. I'm a very okay, I'm 41 years old, but I'm a very young filmmaker because I only worked with photography earlier. So the thing I do is I make short films for myself all the time, which I edit later on, and not all of them are good, but I have to keep on training. I need my flying hours to become a really good filmer.
You got frequent flyer points for short films.
Yeah, and that's what we need to do. And the moment, especially the moments when you don't feel inspired at all, those are the moments where we have to get out there and start filming, because then we need to break it again. Then we need to go further. I mean, it's very unlogical in that way, but it's all about, you know, testing, trying, and see what the possibilities are. And there are a lot of possibilities now. I mean, there's so many people who are not even filmmakers who make great stuff because of the fact that they try and they have a longing for telling stories. It's all about, I would say many times, the longing to tell something.
Yeah, that really defines filmmaking, the longing to tell a visual story with emotion.
Exactly. Yeah.
Absolutely. We've got actually Elliot's on with us now. Elliot, who is your co-juror, and he is asking, how important are film festivals for filmmakers? So you've touched on that already, but entering competitions to make sure that I guess that it forces you to get serious and make a film.
I think, I mean, film festivals and competitions like this are, of course, a great tool to show your work. I mean, in this world where people are producing so many things, it can be difficult sometimes to reach out with your work. It can be difficult to reach to people with the stories you want to tell them. So, I mean, film festivals for me in general is just a great way to screen your work and to have people as well judge it, you know, and I mean, you will always learn something. You will always grow from there when you enter these competitions, when you enter the festivals in general. It's surprising to see that there is a lot of people out there who are super curious, and sometimes, of course, when you sit behind the computer or you shoot your things, you feel like, okay, for whom am I actually doing this? Well, I mean, we need to be able to reach out to the ones who do care, and there are many people who do care about these stories, so it's of a huge importance.
Yeah, it is, and it's a very democratic process.
It is.
Everyone can be an artist, everyone can tell their story.
Exactly. And that's the great thing, you know, and I would say this in general like that for film festivals. Hey, if the film is good enough, if the things you produce are good enough, and it can be very small films, it can be very cheap produced films, it can be anything. The imagination is there, and if the story is there, I promise you there will be people who will receive it in that way as well. And that's the great thing.
Brilliant. So what are you going to be looking for when you're judging the films in the Nikon European Film Festival? What's going to stand out for you?
I think, like I said a little bit earlier in the conversation, I think I will be looking for I think the right combination of all the ingredients, basically. The story, it has to be a good story. It doesn't have to be a spectacular story, but it has to be a story which I feel the creator is really meaning to tell. It has to feel sincere on that way. It has to feel quite organic and natural on that way. And that in combination with a great edit, or that in combination with the beautiful use of the filmed material, I mean, that is for me extremely important when I judge material. It has to, I gotta feel it, I gotta see it, and I have to be in that moment.
We had a question from Flor. I had a few questions from her about beginners coming into the competition. What advice would you give to a beginner? Because she was a bit concerned about her work or the work of a beginner being judged against the standard of other people who might have better kit. So how can we reassure her that this is really open to everybody?
Flor, I would say, first of all, don't see yourself as a beginner. I mean, it is all about, I mean, that little part, the little piece of work you make. I mean, beginners make fantastic work. Beginners can make, I mean, beautiful, naive, beautiful work, you know. So I would not say to her, take that beginner part away. First of all, to take away a little bit of the tension around the whole thing by sending in work. You know, it's all about sending in the work. It's about to enjoy it, you know. The most important of all is that you enjoy the process of creating it. Enjoy that thing, because a career goes like this. A career is not a sprint, you know. The thing we're doing and the thing I've been doing is all based on basically a marathon. You know, I mean, this is something I've been working now with for, I don't know, so many years already. And if I was sprinting, I would have got very tired and disappointed after some time, because I have no breath anymore.
Yeah.
And just see it in the long run, you know. It's eventually we will become better. Eventually we will create better stories, and eventually we will be able to reach out. And it goes like that, you know. It can go really fast, of course, but in general, I would say, see it as a marathon. Enjoy the ride. Try to grow through every project you're doing. Grow slowly, learn, learn, learn.
That's terrific advice, especially about comparison, because comparison is the killer of artistic expression.
Exactly. I mean, comparison, if I should compare myself today, yeah, I'm sorry, I would not be sitting here. I would never have started filming. When we went into the field for some years ago, like I said earlier, we couldn't do sound. I almost didn't know where the record button on the camera, on the Nikon camera was. It was totally new for me. It was something I'd rejected for all the years. So that's just a matter of, you know, get out there. There's no right, there's no wrong, but you have to enjoy the process of learning.
Yeah. Actually, speaking of learning, what was the mistake that taught you the most in terms of learning about filmmaking? You said you had issues with sound before. Was there anything else that was problematic when you tried to change from a photographic point of view to a film point of view?
Well, I think in the beginning, I was too passive when it comes to, I was using maybe too many stills in my way of filming. I love a very still way of filming. That means I don't need that much action. I'm maybe more a fan for myself in poetic approaches and the poetic scenes, but it became too still. So you have to find different ways of filming as well, to put in a little bit more, I would say, drive and action and feeling into it, when the emotions can come out on a better way. So I would say I was seeing my camera too much as a still photographer, and I needed to learn more how a filmer was thinking without copying totally what a filmer is doing. But I needed to find the right combination, and that I was definitely doing wrong in the beginning, and still many times. I mean, it gets easier now because there are new tools and new easier tools to use in the field, of course. To get action into the scenes when you need action, but yeah, I mean, those mistakes you make, that's just logical.
Yeah, but that's how you learn.
Exactly.
And it's also wonderful to see that in the films you do have this very strong contrast between these sweeping landscapes, this beautiful scenery, it's almost meditative, and then the subjects that you're talking to are talking about really deep issues in their lives. So is contrast something that you're conscious of being a hallmark of your work?
Well, I think that what I try to do most of all is that when the talks are based on these deep emotions and these feelings, is that the way they're telling their emotions and feelings, that goes very much together with the tempo you have to use in the visuals as well. So the visuals have to be very close connected to the temperament the persons are using in the film. Otherwise, it will create I would say, a wall in between the person which we're seeing in the film and me. I have to be able to transform the person's comments and talks and talks about emotion into the atmospheres and into the tempo of the film as well. I mean, that's, I think, is really important when you're filming, to find these scenes who connect to these talks, who connect to this state of mind these persons are in.
Yes, that's actually going to be an interesting challenge, because we're talking about tempo now. It's getting tempo into a 140-second film. What kind of advice would you give to someone trying to get tempo and storyline into 140 seconds?
It's really hard. It's definitely really, really hard. Sometimes I feel myself it's easier to make, say, a 10-minute film than a 1-minute film, because everything has to fit in this 1 minute or in these 140 seconds. That is super hard. But I would say, in general, I would say that the logics behind it are kind of the same for any movie, I would say, basically, because hey, sometimes you need 90 minutes to tell the story, and sometimes you can still tell the story in 140 seconds. But I think you need to be very restricted and very careful what you want to tell. You can't tell everything in 140 seconds. So you need to be very selective with maybe one little thing, one little feeling, one specific little question. That's the thing you have to use. And because, yeah, 140 seconds, I mean, I'm definitely sure that in the end material, we're going to see a lot of stories where people are managed to tell a lot of things in 140 seconds. But even there, you know, the edit is going to be so important, how you build it up and how you create the tension and how the finish is going to be, or is there a finish even? So that these components are exciting.
It is exciting. I mean, we forget that we are every day watching ads that tell stories in 30 seconds. So telling one in 140 seconds is actually a lot more than many of the stories you see every day.
Yeah. I think a good way of doing it as well is to see, I mean, there are a lot of short films on the internet where you can take a look. And short films can be all from 20 seconds or 30 seconds to just a couple of minutes. And try to study some of these great short films as well. And how do they build it? How do they do it? And how do they find the storyline? And it's also, you know, like any occupation, is seeing how other people are doing it, seeing how they're able to tell the stories and what kind of visuals they're using, and then get inspired by other films, I would say, as well.
And what is the most challenging aspect? What have you found has been the most challenging aspect of making a movie?
For me, the most challenging aspect is though the edit, finding, of course, the story. And I mean, the story can be obvious, but if you have a very obvious story, then it can be boring. So the most challenging thing for me is to find more exciting ways to tell the story, basically. Is to find, edit-wise, different forms to create or to tell this little story. If it becomes too obvious, then there's a risk it becomes too boring. And if it becomes too spectacular, then you might miss the whole point. So you need to find as well there. The thing you have to do, you have to try to keep the viewer whole the time on the screen. The viewer is not allowed to leave this little film. You just, when you start the film, you have to grab the viewer. And the viewer is not allowed to leave the film until the end of the film. And so you need to find these little basically, points of tension, of tempo, of interest in the film to keep the person there.
Absolutely. Because even in 140 seconds, you can lose somebody.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, it's the same if you see on the internet, the average amount of time people are spending behind YouTube clips or whatever, it's quite often just a few seconds. And then they leave, you know. So you need to be very, very good already in the first beginning. Think about the start has to be good. The start has to be maybe surprising. The start has to be maybe emotional directly, so it captured me on one way. So start, middle, end is super important. You want to keep the person into the screen.
You know, that is the classic advice for any screenwriting or any writing is beginning, middle, and end.
Exactly.
If the story doesn't wind up, if the story doesn't complete, you haven't got a film.
Exactly, and like I said, you can have only sauce, and it won't be enough, because people nowadays, we are so aware of the film medium, and we're so aware of quality, and with all the amount of films we've seen, and I mean, we're not easy to fool nowadays, and that's also a few extremely important thing to think about, is we're not easy to fool. You have to keep the attention.
Yes, and it has to be emotionally true.
Yeah,
otherwise people will feel that they're deceived, or they won't engage in the story.
Exactly, and I think especially nowadays is that, I mean, we have so much productions out there which are spectacular, and stories and everything has to be more spectacular than other things, and blah blah blah. But when it comes to true feelings and true things in life, I mean, if it stops, when people stop screaming, you can hear the ones basically, you know, whispering. I want to hear the whispering too, you know. That is important nowadays, I would say. It's the whispering.
Absolutely. Just the subtlety.
Exactly.
And that's when you know that you're really reaching someone, or you've reached a point with someone, that they're expressing something very true. It is quiet.
Exactly.
It's deep.
Exactly. That is, especially now, I mean, there's so many people around us who carry incredible stories or things around us which is happening around us, you know. I mean, it doesn't have to be big. We want to hear and see the small stories as well, the very small things in life, the details.
Yeah, so we can rest assured, we can rest the minds of anyone who thinks they have to do an action movie in 140 seconds. We want to see something beautiful.
Well, I mean, I would definitely not stop that person. I would definitely love to see a great action film in 140 seconds. If that's your thing, go for it. I love it. But it has to be story as well.
Yeah, we're not expecting the production values of a massive action film in 140 seconds. We're expecting whatever people have that is coming from their unique creative inspiration.
Exactly.
And that leads me on to asking you, where does your inspiration come from?
Can be so many different things. For me, of course, nature has always been important, definitely super important in all the stories I basically do. And even when I shoot in areas where there's very little nature, I always find something where I can use. When it comes to inspiration in general, I would say paintings are for me extremely important. Seeing paintings and analyze paintings. And then when it comes to how to become a better photographer, how to use the best light, how to use the best expressions, painting is perfect. To study paintings, that's probably the best you can do in your life, I would say, as a visual person. And when it comes to film, I mean, I think you have to see a tremendous amount of film in general. Actions, whatever, sci-fi, whatever. Enjoy seeing film and just analyze them. And I mean, try to figure out how they do it. Try to figure out how they built up that storyline. I mean, film is fantastic.
It is, and there are so many genres that people can explore, and they can do that in this competition as well. They could do a horror film. They could, you know, could do a quiet meditational film. They could do a poem set to visuals. It's open to anything.
Exactly. And because there are no boundaries when it comes to imagination. That's something I have to say, and which I really want to put a big, I mean, imagination, bring it on. Really, there's no boundaries at all.
So tell us your favorite films, the ones that have inspired you, not necessarily directly inspired your work, but the ones that have made you think, wow, how did they do that? Or it just touches an emotional nerve?
There's quite different styles, I would say. I'm a big fan still of yeah. I mean, Burned by the Sun is a Russian film made, I don't know how many years ago. I think it won a Cannes Festival. It's a very simple story about a family in a house, basically. Very simple shot in a house, and the dialogues in between the people. the atmospheres, and that is something I think I would say for me key many times. I want to keep it simple myself as well. I have to be able to shoot it myself. And I mean, that film, Burned by the Sun, is a great example, I think, how you can make great films. And I mean, I see a lot of action films from LA, from the US as well. I love it. I love these enormous film projects, and of course, and they're inspiring in different ways, I would say then. But yeah, I saw a great film for some time ago. It came out, I guess, for almost 2 years ago. It's Her. It's this beautiful film, little story about one man who falls in love with his operative system. It's insane. It's an insane story, but it's beautiful, and it's about the dialogues he's having with his operating system, and the light, and it's beautifully shot by a Dutch filmer, by the way, and been working many years in Sweden, Hoyte van Hoytema. It's just fantastic. And I mean, many films I enjoy, I have to say, but those are some of the films I really enjoy.
But what's great about the films that you just illustrated is that they are giving tips for us on how people can work their films without big budgets. They can be in a single location, in a house, focusing on one particular thing happening. It could be a dialogue. Just
exactly.
Like the love story with the robot. It's that simple.
And exactly, I think that's the thing. What's going on right now as well in filmmaking is that, I mean, there's so many people out there who want to make films and who are making films, and they're using like small budgets, and they use the equipment they have. They can use their own cameras, and it's not the same amount of money nowadays like it was before. Also because of the fact that we need to reinvent the storytelling over and over again as well. I mean, we can definitely make films with very no problem. Before it was impossible. So you don't need to have to be 30 or 40 people on the scene. You can be 2 or 3 or 4. That's it. Or 1.
Or, as in your case, 1.
Yeah.
Okay, one final question, Pieter, because I know that we're running out of time. Can you just, it's a question from your co-juror, Elliot, and he's asking, what's the single most important piece of advice that you would give to an emerging filmmaker?
Well, so it's hard to give advices, but I think I would say, I mean, through the years of storytelling, even or with stills or with film, I would say try to dig where you stand. Try to see the world around you. What is happening around you, and how can you visualize that world? I would say that is one of the most important advices I got when I started as a photographer. Not aiming all the time to new directions or if you work on a spot somewhere abroad, don't think about the next town or the next place you're going to shoot that film. All happening in front of you. Keep it simple, keep it easy, and enjoy the place where you are.
That is absolutely brilliant advice. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you, everybody, for your questions. And we look forward to seeing you, Pieter, on the judging day. And for everyone who's watching, don't forget that the competition closes on the 15th of January. So you have exactly a month now to get your film together. That's plenty of time. Don't you agree, Pieter?
It is plenty of time, definitely.
Yeah, fantastic. So thank you all. Thank you, Pieter. And
for joining.
Thank you. And keep filming, everybody. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Good luck. Bye-bye.